time passes irrespective of how you spend it. And if you're not intentional about how you spend that time, you're just going to waste a lot of it. But I think when the money is just kind of divided all over the place, I think a house divided against itself, how can it stand? It's the same kind of thing when it comes to your finances. If one of you's doing A and the other one's doing B, if you don't come together in any way when it comes to your finances, then it can cause contention and it can cause financial issues. In those early years of marriage, don't just get caught in the source of being married and, just enjoying your lives. Really think about how you can grow your wealth faster. Welcome to Not Another Money Podcast. Why is it called Not Another Money Podcast, you may be wondering? It's because this is not your typical money show. Get ready for real money conversations and lessons, expert insights from some of our very special guests, and hear some really inspiring stories from everyday people. On this podcast, you're going to learn how to earn more, how to spend less, how to grow the difference, and most importantly, live your best financial life. On today's episode, I was feeling a bit reflective. So my husband and I celebrated our 13th wedding anniversary just a few days ago, and I can't believe, to be honest, that I've been married for 13 years, but here we are 13 years in and we're still going strong. We thank God. It's been a really amazing time, and we've learned a lot over the 13 years of marriage, and we made a lot of mistakes financially as well. And I just thought it would be really good in this video in this podcast episode rather, to share some of those money lessons and money mistakes that we made in those 13 years of marriage. If I could go back to the early days when we were newlyweds with a fresh, clean slate, these are some of the things that I would have done differently. So I'm sharing those things that I would have done differently so that if you're at the start of your journey, you can make those applications straight away and avoid some of the pitfalls that we fell into. But equally, no matter where you are in your marriage, whether you're 1 year in, 5 years in, 10 years in, some of these things that I would have done differently, some of the mistakes that I made at the beginning of our relationship and throughout, to be honest, if you just apply a few of these, it could really help you, I think, on your financial journey too. So without further ado, I'm going to go through my list now. So the first thing I put on my list is weekly money dates. Now, this is something my husband and I just incorporated within the last year or so, I'd say. We'll do intermittent budget check-ins, usually on a monthly basis. We will set a plan at the start of the month for our finances, and then that would be kind of it until the following month. We would then do another check-in. Sometimes we'll check in here and there as well, but there was never really a structure and a plan to it. And I think it's so important to have those weekly check-ins so that you're constantly mindful of where you're going financially and you have a plan in which you're both similarly working towards. Because I think when you don't have those weekly check-ins, one of you could be going left, the other one's going right, and then you have to wait a whole month. Or if you're not even having those monthly check-ins, it could be when something major arises that you sit down and have that conversation. But having that weekly check-in, it brings you into alignment. It even brings you closer as well, because you're having conversations that you ordinarily may not have had. And it's just spending that extra quality time with each other with the intentional focus on your finances. I think another thing I would have done differently is open a joint account from the get-go. I think we were probably like 10 years in when we finally opened a joint account. Up until that point, we had just been managing our finances in separate accounts. So I would send money to my husband, he would send money to me, or we would send it to one of our bills accounts and then make the payments there. And there was never really a systemized process to it in terms of how we were managing our finances. But I think when you have everything just in one place, in one account, and you have one clear picture and view of the finances, it just makes it so much easier to manage the money. And then it avoids any unnecessary miscommunication or misunderstanding, because you know exactly how much you have to play with, and then you can make an intentional plan for that money. But I think when the money is just kind of divided all over the place, I think a house divided against itself, how can it stand? It's the same kind of thing when it comes to your finances. If one of you's doing A and the other one's doing B, if you don't come together in any way when it comes to your finances, then it can cause contention and it can cause financial issues. So I think having that transparency and that openness, it builds a stronger relationship. I think overall it builds a stronger financial foundation too. The next thing I would say I wish we did from the get-go is created a budget. Now, a budget is a conscious plan for your money. So if you're a person that doesn't like to budget or says you budget in your head, it's one thing knowing in your head what you want to do with your finances. It's another thing actually sitting down and putting pen to paper and making an intentional plan for your money. And that is something that we didn't do until we found ourselves in a lot of debt. I will share my full debt story on another podcast episode, but there's videos, to be fair, on my YouTube channel where I talk about my debt journey and how we ended up in £36,000 worth of debt. But just generally, I feel like we could have avoided that situation had we have sat down and budgeted and created a plan for our money on a monthly basis. But up until the point when we ended up in debt, what we used to do is just kind of, we know how much our bills were. Most of the bills came out of my husband's account. I would send money to him for certain bills, and then vice versa. He would send money to me for certain expenses. And we were just always balancing the books without necessarily being in front of our money and being intentional about telling our money where to go. And like I said, it was only when life went upside down that we learned about the power of creating a budget and telling our money where to go. So if you're one of those people that don't have a budget and a plan for your money, I would suggest you start budgeting today, because it is a game changer. If you don't have a template that you use, I do have a free version on my website. I also have a paid version, which is a lot better and more interactive, which you can also download. I will include a link in the show notes, and if you're watching on YouTube, I'll include a link as well in the description box to my budget template, so that you can get started with creating that budget. Because there's nothing worse than coming to the last few days of the month and then you're just sitting down thinking, oh my gosh, like I cannot wait for payday because all the money is finished. I think when you're intentional about it, planning ahead, it helps make the month run a lot smoother, and it just gives you that peace of mind because you know exactly where you are and where you're going. I think if we had created that budget back then, we would have been so much better at living within our means. But because we didn't have a budget at the beginning, we didn't have a plan for our money at the beginning, we just were living not even beyond our means at that time, because we weren't living beyond our means until we got into debt. However, we were spending all of our means. There was no buffer. There was nothing left. We would spend that money down to the final penny, and then payday will come. We'll spend that money and the cycle will just continue to repeat itself. And I guess that's what we call the payday to payday cycle. We were definitely victims of that. We were trapped in that cycle of constantly getting paid, the money going, getting paid, the money goes, because we weren't in front of it and on top of it. So definitely a key takeaway early on in marriage: start as you means to go. Be intentional about your finances, about creating a budget, about creating an intentional financial plan for yourself. Another thing I wish we had done early on in our marriage is tracking our expenses. Now, this is something that I, again, didn't do until I was on my debt-free journey. Up until that point, money was just coming and going and coming and going, and there was no clear strategy or no plan for that money, and I wasn't aware of how much I was spending. But it was only when I embarked on my debt-free journey and I actually sat down and did that exercise, and I was looking at my account expenses for the last few months, really tallying up how much I had spent with different service providers or on different products and things of that nature. And I was blown away by where my money was really going. I mentioned on another episode actually about the fact that there were months when I was spending £150 in McDonald's. That was just one of the many things that were just taking my money. Because I wasn't on top of my spending and I wasn't tracking my expenses, I wasn't aware of the fact that the money was just literally going on things that were quite wasteful and things that didn't really bring value to my life. Now, I'm not saying don't eat McDonald's again or spend your money on McDonald's. By all means, if it brings you satisfaction and pleasure, all the rest of it, then sure, buy that McDonald's. But when you're doing it excessively, knowing full well that you have other financial priorities, then it becomes an issue. So I think sitting down and tracking your expenses, being aware of where your money's going, it will be an eye-opener. It's a challenging conversation to have, particularly if one of you is a spender and one of you is a saver, for example, which was the case in our situation. I'm definitely the spender. My husband was very much the saver. I was the one spending all the money while he's the one trying to save the money. And after a while, I guess it can begin to grate on that partner who is the saver, because it's like, I'm trying to build and you're just here spending all the money. Where's all that money going? But I think when you become aware of your spending habits and you sit down and look at the numbers on paper and you start to think to yourself, actually, £150 on McDonald's, does it make sense? No, it doesn't. Not when I'm trying to save up to buy a house, or £200 on Ubers when actually I have a monthly travel card. Does that make sense when I'm trying to save to buy a new car, for example? No, it doesn't. So I think just really sitting down and writing those expenses on paper and looking back at previous expenses, it brings that awareness that you need for you to make better financial decisions moving forward. And I think as a married couple, when you're together, tracking your expenses together does make you accountable to one another, and it makes you more exposed, I guess, to one another, which some people don't like the sound of that. No one wants to be transparent and exposed, but you are a union. So Why don't you want to show your true self to one another? Why would you want to hide your reality from your partner or from your spouse? At the end of the day, they married you for you and they have to accept you, flaws and all. The next thing I wish we had done, and this is a big one, I so wish, if I could go back in time, this is the one thing that I really wish that we had done, and that was to set a financial plan for ourselves for the next 5 to 10 years. Sit down and have a session where you plan your future. Like, where do we want to be in 5 years' time? What do we want our lives to look like in 5 years' time? Are we planning for children? How many children do we want to have? Where do we want to live? What kind of school do we want our children to go? Do we want to travel regularly? Do we want to buy a new house? What area do we want to buy that house in? What kind of schools are in that area, because that's a consideration for location. All of these things are conversations that you really want to have, so that when you enter into marriage, you're very much intentional about the direction in which you're both going, and you have a common destination in which you're both trying to get to. But I think what can tend to happen is that time passes irrespective of how you spend it, and if you're not intentional about how you spend that time, you're just going to waste a lot of it. And when I look back in retrospect, the first few years of marriage, while yes, you can say we were young, we were free, we were enjoying our lives, that was great, and yes, we did enjoy it, but I don't think that having plans in place means that you sacrifice enjoyment. I believe you could do both, and we definitely could have done both. In hindsight, we could have enjoyed and we could have been more intentional about creating a plan for ourselves and for our future family, because obviously now I'm living in that future. I'm thinking, younger Tolu, you could have done things a little bit differently. You could have been a bit more intentional about the plan and vision you have for yourself and for your future family. But I guess, like they say, hindsight is 2020, which is why I'm here sharing it with you, so that if you are at the early stages, like I said, you can do things differently. You can be intentional about your 5-year plan. Obviously, you can have a plan and life can come at you fast and it can mess up your plans, but it's better to have a plan and fail than not to plan at all. I've messed up that saying, but you get the gist of it. Being intentional and set financial goals. Not only does this help you guys financially, but it helps you as a couple as well, because now you're on the same page. You have a unified vision, you have a unified direction in which you're trying to go. And when you don't have that vision, when you don't have that plan for yourself, you don't have that plan for your partnership, time is just going to go past and you're going to look back and think, I didn't actually achieve any of what I potentially could have achieved or what I wanted to achieve but never vocalized to my spouse. So I think, having those conversations, setting that plan on paper, I think it's just an incredible thing to do, and it will be so nice once you reach that 5 years to look back and be like, wow, this is what we had planned to achieve, and now we're living in it. We've achieved X, Y, and Z. And don't worry if that plan doesn't all come to pass. Even if you tick off one thing off that list, it's still one thing that you may not have achieved had you not set that plan in motion. So definitely, I would say set yourself financial goals and a financial plan. And to be honest, this applies whether you're married or not, whether you're in the single phase now and you're preparing for marriage or preparing for a later relationship, or just preparing for life in general. Having a plan and a vision for your life is so important. Being very intentional with what you give your time to and where you're trying to go, because I think when you don't have a plan and you don't have a vision and you're not intentional about what you give your time to, you end up wasting a lot of time and being very idle and being dragged from pillar to post and left to right, because you don't have a plan for your time. Someone else is going to make a plan for that time for you. It's something that I do regularly now, myself and my husband, and it's something that, yes, I wish I could go back to a younger Tolu 13 years ago to be like, Tolu, set that plan in motion. But here we are now. I've learned, I'm doing better. And fast forward 10 years, God willing, I'll be able to look back at this time and be like, thank God you made different decisions and you were a lot more intentional about the financial goals that you were trying to pursue. The next thing on my list that I wish I achieved early on in marriage or worked towards early on in marriage was building an emergency fund. Like, I wish back then I had built like a 6-month or even 12-month emergency fund so that I could have more control over my decisions. So what do I mean by that? I think when you don't have an emergency fund, an emergency becomes like literally life and death and very critical. But when you do have an emergency fund in place, you can make decisions that are more in your better interest because you have that backing and that safety net and that cushion. Whereas when you don't have that emergency fund, like, it can be very difficult to make decisions or to maneuver because you're thinking about all the financial obligations you have. So for example, if your boiler breaks down and you're a homeowner, if you don't have that emergency fund in place, that becomes a big issue. That's a big thing. Where am I going to find £3,000 for a new boiler plus installation? It's a lot of money. Whereas if you have that emergency fund in place, that emergency just kind of becomes a bit of an inconvenience, but it's not a life or death thing. You are still going to be able to heat your house and still be able to have a hot shower. But when you don't have that emergency fund in place, now you have to start thinking about, okay, where can I borrow this money from to make it happen? And then once you borrow that money, of course, you have to find a way to pay it back. So then it just becomes a bigger stress than it needs to become. So that emergency fund gives you peace of mind. And I think in relationships, in marriage particularly, money can be a really big source of contention and frustration and cause a lot of issues. And I think emergencies particularly can add to that weight, because that pressure puts you under pressure, puts your spouse under pressure, and it can cause a lot of unnecessary friction in the household. But just you two coming together and building that emergency fund and saying, yes, we have this security blanket that if life comes at us, something that we hadn't anticipated happening, we have that money that we can fall back on, and we have that peace and that security. And I think it's such a big thing to have in place. It's not something people talk about a lot, but most people think, oh yeah, I'll just use my credit card as that emergency fund. But actually, all you're doing is just delaying the inevitable, because that credit card still needs to be paid off and that money will eventually need to be paid back. Whereas if you have that backing of the emergency fund, you have that safety net, it just makes life a little bit less tense. Another thing that I really wish we had done early on in marriage more, because we did do it, if I'm honest, but we could have done a lot more of this, is investing in experiences rather than material possessions. Like, I remember the things that my husband and I did together much more than the gifts that he bought me. And in hindsight, I think a lot of my requests back then in the early years of marriage were for material possessions. I remember really putting a lot of pressure on him to buy me this designer watch. Back then it was a Michael Kors watch. I say designer, now that would not be viewed as a designer watch because it's quite inexpensive compared to the prices of watches these days. But back then, when we were newlyweds, young newlyweds at that, it was a big amount of money that I requested he spent on that watch. And in hindsight, that watch, where is it now? I don't even know. I mean, I enjoyed it in the moment, but I lost interest in it very quickly after I got it. It was one of those fads at the time. Everyone had one and I really wanted one too. But in hindsight, I probably would have preferred he spent that money on an experience, because I'd still be able to record that experience now and I'd have all the pictures and memories of it. Whereas, yeah, material things, they come and go. The time spent with a loved one and the memories you get to create, like, that is invaluable. Like, you can't put a price tag on it. I mean, that's not me saying to you, babe, not to buy me any nice gifts again, because I still love nice gifts. But I think as I've gone on in marriage, as I'm getting older, my priorities are shifting. I'm actually more concerned about experiences over things. So definitely, I wish I had this mindset a lot sooner, because I could have gone to so many more places and seen so many more amazing things if I wasn't so materialistic back then. Oh my gosh. So this one, yeah, is such a big mistake that we made in our early years of marriage. And I say it's a mistake, but in actuality, you don't know what you don't know. And back then, I didn't know. I knew about saving money. That was a thing, like open a savings account and put money into your savings account. Fine. But what I didn't know about was investing. I did not know about investing money. I thought investing was something that was set apart for the richer people in society. I didn't think it was accessible to people like myself, if I'm very honest. So when I say investing, I'm talking about a stocks and shares ISA account. That was not something we opened in the early days of marriage. But when I sit down and think about how much money we could have in our investment account now, had we started investing 13 years ago, yeah, it's sad. It's actually heartbreaking, because back then, when we had no kids and no dependents and we were living with my in-laws, we had so much disposable money. I mean, yes, we were saving to buy a house, but we could have also put money into an investment account, even if it was just 5% of our income on a monthly basis each going into that account. We're talking about thousands of pounds every year that we could have been investing that we weren't. And what makes it worse when it comes to investing in these type of accounts is not only are you missing out on the money that you've invested making returns, you're also missing out on the money you've invested making returns on the returns. So it's like the power of compound interest, which I mentioned previously on another episode. Like, making money, make money. It's mad. Like, when you come off this episode, you just look it up, because I'm not explaining it as well as I probably could, but the power of compound interest is mind-blowing. And I didn't learn about this until probably a good 10 years into my marriage. And In hindsight, I really wish that we had opened that stocks and shares ISA account in our early years of marriage and started putting money away in that account and just squirreling money away wherever we could. So even if it wasn't something we could commit to on a monthly basis, when we were getting Christmas money, when we were getting bonuses, any kind of extra income that we were receiving, we could have been investing that money, and that money could have been making so much more money for us, which will help us later on down the line. So just in case you're not familiar with what a stocks and shares ISA is, it's a tax-free savings account that you can open with pretty much any bank. And what that means is that any money you put in that account, any returns on that money, you don't get taxed on it. And you can pay up to £20,000 a year into your stocks and shares ISA. All that extra money that you're making on interest, you don't have to pay taxes on it. So not only do you not pay tax on the money you've put in, you also don't pay tax on your return. Not many things in this country do they not tax you on. So the fact that that account still exists and you can still make money without being taxed on it, it's just a no-brainer. And it's something that any one of us can do, but not many people are doing because of a lack of awareness. So don't make that mistake. Married or single, open that stocks and shares ISA account. But equally, if you're married, that's not even £20,000 now. That's £40,000 tax-free that you can be investing into that account. Another thing I wish we did differently in our early years of marriage is not being too available. So I know I mentioned previously about the fact that I value experiences over things, but equally, I do believe that it's not everywhere you get invited to that you should go. Sometimes say no, don't be too available. The reason why I say this is because being too available is going to eat into your pocket. It's going to eat into your funds. It's also going to take away from your time. As we know, it is the most valuable currency that we have. So we want to be intentional about what we give in our time to. So I'm not saying that, you're married now, that's it, cut off all your friends, cut off your family and don't go anywhere and don't do anything fun. However, I do think it's very important to be intentional about your unit. When I say your unit, I'm talking about you and your spouse and the goals in which you've planned for and you're moving towards, and be very guarded about ensuring that the plans that you make with friends and family members and all the rest of it don't impede on those goals that you've set as a unit at home, or don't take you away from the focus of that vision in which you're trying to pursue with your spouse. So I think it's just finding that balance and that happy medium so that you're not giving yourself away to everybody else so that you have nothing left for your spouse, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's what I would say there. Don't be too available. Yes, of course. Don't be that person that now you've married, you've arrived, you don't talk to anybody anymore. Nobody can phone you. Nobody can text you. Nobody can find you. Like, you just go MIA until you send your baby shower announcement. Don't be that person. But equally, don't just overexpend yourself to the detriment of yourself and your spouse and your relationship and your union. Hopefully that makes a bit of sense and you catch the balance of what I'm trying to say here. Number 10, it's not specific to you as a married couple, but I think as two individuals in a unit, it will help you go further faster. And that is if you change jobs often. So one thing I wish I did differently in my early years of marriage is really took the opportunity of shopping around when it comes to employers and not stay committed to the same company for many, many years. I think because I was just comfortable at my last place of work and I was comfortable with my job, comfortable with my routine and comfortable in my life, like marriage was sweet, work was easy, life was just easy at that time. I guess you could say I was a bit complacent during those years. And in hindsight, I wish that I was less complacent and a bit more ambitious and more of a go-getter, and pursued a lot more new opportunities elsewhere. So every 2 to 3 years, I wish I was switching jobs and switching employers, because your pay rises a lot faster when you switch employers versus when you just stay in the same place for many, many years. All you get is like, a little promotion here or there, or the incremental pay rises that they try and do in line with inflation. So yeah, I would say married couples in those early years of marriage, don't just get caught in the source of being married and, just enjoying your lives. Really think about how you can grow your wealth faster by moving around to different employers and getting sizable pay rises each time. Going on from that point about changing jobs often, I also think it's so important, and again, in hindsight, in my early years of marriage, I wish I did this. It was learning new skills. I went through many years, particularly in the first 5 to 7 years of marriage, I want to say, where I wasn't really learning anything new. I wasn't learning any new skills. I wasn't really interested. Actually, wait, tell a lie. I remember learning how to sew at one point, and this was around the time when people were getting married very often in my church, and they kept on giving us these fabrics. So basically, in Nigeria culture, when someone's getting married, you do this thing called ashoebi, where you basically you buy the material that they've given you, and then you make dresses out of that material for that wedding. I was going to back-to-back weddings at that time, and it gets very expensive having bespoke dresses made every single time. So I thought it'd be really good for me to just learn how to make these dresses myself. That way I don't have to keep paying a tailor to make me a custom dress. So yeah, that was the only time that I learned a new skill. Ask me what I did with that skill, please. That sewing machine actually that I received as a wedding gift, it's just gathering dust somewhere in the attic in my house. I haven't used it in many, many years. I doubt it even still works, because I probably used it a handful of times at the time when I bought it and learned that skill. But anyway, that was the only time in the early years of marriage that I learned a new skill. Other than that, no, I don't think I was learning any new skills. I probably learned how to cook a few new dishes and stuff like that. You know, I was trying to be the model wife back then, making all these bespoke meals for my husband. Like, I was really excited. I was learning how to make like all these different dishes, and I used to be that person that presented the rice all nicely in a bowl on the plate. Yeah, those were good times. My husband can attest to that. You know, I was literally trying to be like Susie Homemaker. Fast forward is a different story. I have 4 children. Life is very busy. You're getting fed, that's the main thing. But anyway, I digress. The purpose of what I was saying is that it's important to learn a new skill, I think, early on in marriage, just generally, because you can create other streams of income using these skills. Like, imagine that sewing skill that I learned all the way back then. I actually followed through with it and became really good at it. I too could become that tailor making dresses for people and charging them a fortune on the side of my day job. And that could be extra money that I could be investing into my investment account, like I mentioned earlier. In the early years of marriage, before children come along, before life gets really busy and hectic, maximize that time and make the most of it. Add skills to yourself, add value to yourself, so that you can add value to other people and charge for it. So that's something that I did. I only started my entrepreneurship. Wow, I actually said it successfully the first time. Well done. I only started that journey when I had my first son. When I got pregnant with my first child and found out I was going on statutory maternity leave, that is when I started thinking about making extra money. Before that, I was just enjoying my life. Like I said, I was just coasting along, working, and other than that, not really thinking about how to monetize any skills that I have or develop any new skills or make money on the side. I was content with my 9 to 5 income. It's only when I realized that I was going to be on statutory maternity pay, taking a drastic pay cut, that I started thinking about, okay, what other things can I do to make money on the side? And also thinking about the fact that I don't want to work full time after I have this child. I want to be at home with my child a lot more. How can I facilitate that? So that's the only time I was thinking about making extra money. And it's incredibly hard having a newborn child, being a first time mum, and then also trying to build a business on the side. That's a story for another day, actually. I will share my whole entrepreneurship story about my first business that I did. Something Sweeter it was called. It was an amazing time. But again, I'm digressing. Learn a skill in your early years of marriage. When you first got married, within the first few years, when you have a little bit more time on your hand before children have come along and you're still young and able to do so, learn that skill, because that skill, no one can take it from you, and it's only going to add to your skill stack, and it's only going to make you a stronger candidate in any field that you go into. Learners are earners is what they say, so never stop learning. Like, you're never too old to learn. As a couple, you can do amazing things if you come together. You learn skills in areas that are even complementary to one another, so that you can, for example, go into business together. If one of you is good at selling, one of you is good at planning and organization, those are 2 great skills that you could even combine together to start something as a couple on the side of your day jobs. I mean, not everybody's built for the working with the spouse life, but if it's something that you 2 think you can do and you have complementary skills, then why not give it a go? Another thing I really wish I did differently in my early days of marriage when it comes to our personal finances is to plan for larger expenses as opposed to be so impulsive. A story that comes to mind was the time when we bought these sofas from DFS. So we bought them from DFS on is it high? Do you call it hire purchase? Yeah, it's hire purchase, where you kind of have a payment plan and you're paying on a monthly basis for the item, but you get it pretty much straight away. I think it took like 6 weeks or so for the sofa to be built and delivered to us. But anyway, we spent all this money in some really, really nice leather sofa. It was beautiful. It was a little corner sofa for our studio flat at the time that we had. Anyway, we bought this nice sofa for this nice new flat that we were staying in. It was quite an impulse purchase because we already had a sofa. We already had chairs that we could sit on, or we could have bought chairs that weren't so expensive. But in the moment, I was excited, still quite early on in our marriage. I just thought, yeah, I want a nice sofa. I want to be able to host friends and family and things of that nature. And I just want a really nice sofa that I feel comfortable on. Anyway, fast forward, not even a year, not even 6 months into that contract for that new sofa, we decided to move back in with my in-laws. So we went from having our own flat to now sharing a bedroom at my mother-in-law and my father-in-law's house. And that sofa that we spent all that money on, that was quite an impulsive purchase. We didn't necessarily need to spend money on it. We still had that payment plan that we were committed to, that we had to keep paying off. And we ended up paying for that thing for many, many months. I think it was like a 2 or 3 year contract actually. So we were paying for that thing long after we bought it. And in hindsight, that was so unnecessary. I didn't need to invest in that sofa at the time. I could have just brought a second-hand one, or I could have gone to somewhere like IKEA and got one for a fraction of the price, because it was a short-term let where we were staying. So it was a totally impulsive and unnecessary purchase. And I could tell you story after story of many of those kind of purchases that I made in the early years of marriage. I'm that person that I see it, I want it, I'll buy it, and then I'll think about the consequences later. And it's only as life hit me hard, I got into debt, that I had no choice but to make better decisions and be a lot more intentional about what I did with my finances. But again, if you're early on in your marriage, or you're engaged and you're planning towards your marriage, I would say really consider big purchases. Don't just go off on a limb and be like, oh yeah, I want it, I'm going to buy it. Think about how that decision you're making will impact your spouse and impact your finances as a whole. So in hindsight, what I would do differently is, rather than just buying on impulse, I would take my time to consider the purchase, find cheaper alternatives, or save up towards buying that item, rather than buying it impulsively on credit and then having to pay for it long after I need the item. So number 13, in celebration of our 13, it's not really in celebration, but number 13, to mark our 13 years of marriage, I would say is investing in financial education a lot sooner. So you don't know what you don't know, like I think I've mentioned already on this episode. So we didn't know about budgeting and how impactful it could be if we sat down and had regular budget check-ins and regular budget meetings. But once we started having those regular budget check-ins, we were able to really get on top of our personal finances and create a budget that worked well for ourselves. Also, like I mentioned earlier about investing and how impactful and powerful it could be, I didn't know about investing when I first got married, and I wish I did know about it, because it literally is a game changer, and it's something that can really help you to build that generational wealth, which we all hopefully desire for ourselves and for our families. I can't stress it enough how important financial education is, because for me, it's changed my financial future, it's changed my finances, and it's changed my mindset. A book that I recommend often to people, in fact, there's many money books that I could recommend on the topic of personal finances. There's been great ones written by loads of authors, but one that really sticks out to me and I like to tell people to go and read is called Your Money or Your Life by an author called Vicky Robin. I've done a review on it on my YouTube channel and a post about it on my blog, and I listened to it again from time to time just to refresh myself and remind myself about how important the way we view money and how we spend money impacts our lives and our families. A lot of times we spend money in ways that don't align with ourselves, our values, and our families and our financial priorities. And we say we value time, we value our loved ones, etc. But actually, the way we spend our money and the way we show up tells a different story. So it's a great book. I definitely would recommend you pick it up. Maybe buy it as a Christmas present for your spouse, or a Valentine's Day gift for your spouse, or just an impromptu gift for your spouse. It's a great book. And there's so many other amazing finance books as well. On my website, I have a reading list. Every year I add 12 books on there. They're usually personal finance or self-development related books. So I'll link that in the show notes and in the description box below so that you can check out the books on there, because there's so many great books that can help you when it comes to your financial education. So there really is no excuse. If you're not a person that likes to pick up physical books, we now have the beauty of Audible, where you can listen to audiobooks. We even have podcasts like this one, or even more intense ones that talk about financial matters in great detail. There's a wealth of information out there, but it's up to us to access it and utilize it to the betterment of ourselves and for our families. Definitely financial education is something I wish I invested in a lot sooner, but I'm glad I know what I know now, and I'm continuously trying to learn and develop and get more financially literate as time goes on. But yeah, that brings us to the end of today's episode. So those are 13 things I wish I knew when I first got married or early on in my marriage. I feel like if I knew these things, I would be a lot further financially now, and I would just know a lot more and just be better off financially. Probably be a millionaire by now if I knew all these things back when I first got married. But anyway, I know now I'm doing better, and hopefully fast forward to another 13 years of marriage, things will look very different for myself and for my family. 13 years time, I'd have like a 20-year-old. That's even more than 20. He'll be like 22. That is crazy. Oh gosh, I don't even want to think about that. But anyway, yeah, it's been a good 13 years. Like, marriage is good, marriage is sweet. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But anyway, yeah, that's literally it for today's episode, and I will speak to you on the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.